All right, it is the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, What and Why Third-Party Discovery Tools for Microsoft 365. We appreciate you joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second and introduce our speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. I am joined by our key speaker today, Solutions Architect Jeff Tujetsch.
Good afternoon, all.
Thanks, Jeff. And before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through before I hand it off to Jeff to start the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. You should see it there at the bottom. Because we do have such a large attendee count, we do not have the ability to unmute you. So in lieu of the raise hand feature, we do encourage you to use the Q&A section on your screen. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up in a separate window, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous to the crowd. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now to kick things off, I have a few slides here to tell you a little bit about how Gimmal can help you take control of your information. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions, as you can see on the screen, include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP content. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jeff so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Shayna. Good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for joining. So today we're going to be talking about these 3 bullet points: the need for discovery tools, locating the critical information within your environment, and the need for third-party discovery. So without further ado, I'm going to move on first to the need for discovery tools. So with the advent of GDPR, I'm sure most of you have heard about GDPR by now. It actually came out or became in effect on May 25th, 2018. Started a little slow. It appeared that some companies weren't quite sure if everyone was serious about this. But I was surprised actually to find out myself the first fine was levied in October 2018. So 5 months into GDPR, they had already levied a fine against the company. So my advice, don't think your company is protected from GDPR or any other privacy rules that are going on in the world today. And we're going to be talking about those. So as I like to say, the train is rolling and there is no stopping it. And you're going to see here some of the fines that have been levied, almost 57 million against a search engine company, 26 against an airline, and almost 24 against a hotel chain. As you can see, these are not rounding errors. So there's some serious money being fined to these companies, and people do need to pay attention to what's going on. So what I thought I'd do, if you can indulge me for a second, I was going to talk about some of the violations that have happened, just to give you some insight. A couple of these were a little surprising to me. First off, there was a violation, none of these 3, but for not implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure the security of personal data. That's exactly what I thought GDPR was. The next one was not providing sufficient information to data subjects. So we're going to be talking about data subjects. So not being able to process a request from a user saying, get rid of my information. The next one really surprised me. In relation to a video surveillance system in an apartment building, a company was fined because of that. And lastly, unsolicited commercial communications without adequately obtaining the consent of the users. I think we have all been subject to that. So I myself, I have actually gone through and requested my name to be scrubbed from a database already from a vendor. So I have already taken action myself in doing that. So when you think of GDPR and privacy laws, I think the first thing that comes to mind is Europe, because this is where GDPR originated, but it's spreading. So as you see here, Europe is very well represented and is predominant as far as the number of countries, but it has gone now to other countries in the world. So North America has Canada. Notice that we don't have one. We'll be talking about that in a minute. South America has a couple of countries, as does Africa. Just wanted to point out the Middle East in general. Asia, and then even Oceania with New Zealand has privacy laws. So there are other countries that are following suit. In fact, there right now is 128 countries have legislation either in place or passed. And once again, 6 of the 7 continents, everybody but Antarctica. So how does that relate to you? Well, it has spread. So now, I'm sure all of you have heard of CCPA. So that is California's Protection Act. There's other states that are joining the process. So here they are listed. And we're getting DSARs, which is that subject access request I was talking about. We're going to go into those a little bit more detail, but that's where you can request to have your information scrubbed from companies' databases. In fact, the UK has one called the right to be forgotten. So the public can go through and ask a UK company to remove their information. This sort of, in my opinion, sort of started with the Freedom of Information Act. This was a federal law passed here in the States in 1967 that allows the public to request information from the federal government. And that has been gaining steam over the years. And from a non-legal aspect, far as outside of your company, legal, financial, and risk are also concerns, different departments within your company that would probably be in agreement with you that something needs to be done. So here we have a United States map, and you're going to see the 3 orange. These are the states that have enacted a privacy law. The ones in green are in active legislation. The ones in blue are either the law has been introduced, it's in committee, cross committee, or cross chambers. So do you see your state here, or do you have offices in any of these states or any of the countries that we saw on the world map? If so, then DSARs and all the privacy laws are going to be applicable to you. The public does have rights, and they will not be afraid to use them. To use a Games of Thrones vernacular, winter is coming. So let's talk about locating critical information. For those of you who are using Microsoft and have cloud data, they do a wonderful job of this. So any of these 3 data stores, they have the ability to perform e-discovery and governance. If these are your 3 stores, definitely take advantage of the tools they offer. However, if you have other stores, what are you doing with them? Any flavor of Exchange mailboxes, file shares, which we're going to delve into a little bit deeper, PSTs, which quite often might be an administrator and legal's worst nightmare as far as distributed data. SharePoint on-prem, as well as Teams. This data also needs to be managed. Storage is cheap. I mean, in past years, prior to these privacy laws, it was just throw more storage at the problem. You can't do that anymore. You need to be aware of what data you have out there. So storage is cheap, but the information there might not be. So I like to make the analogy, like with file shares and email, that no one has a closet in their house that is empty, because it's human nature just to fill it. If you give places for people to put data, they're going to place it there. With the advent of COVID for the past year and a half, there's been a lot of remote working, a lot of telecommuting. With that comes now desktop data being much more dispersed. So that is also a danger item from a legal financial risk assessment part. So do you want to manage this data sitting on people's desktops? The answer to that most likely is yes. You also have non-Microsoft data, things that are outside of the Microsoft realm that you still want to manage. With any of these or any others that you might have, you need to be aware of those as well. So With that foundation laid, we're going to be spending some time here on 6 different scenarios that I have to help you understand exactly why we need to optimize the discovery process. So those of you in the financial, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, any that has any federal laws with which you have to comply, obviously you need to keep that data as long as they tell you to. But once that data has reached its life threshold, what's happening to it? Are you deleting it? Are you archiving it, moving it? That's something to think about, especially once again, the file shares and email. Though email is supposed to be communication, let's face it, we all use it for storage as well. And then file shares, I like to define file shares as dark data. So it's time to shine a light on that dark data, because you need to figure out what is out there and what is harmful, because there could be data that is proprietary and privileged that needs to be protected. There could be data that is harmful sitting out there that possibly needs to be deleted. It is a daunting task. I know I have spoken with clients that have petabytes of file share data. And when you start thinking about that vastness of data, it's very frightening and almost overwhelming to think of how do you deal with that. Well, one of the recommendations I say for that is bite it off in pieces. There is no better way to do that than to go after particular shares, go after particular mailboxes, start working at it. It is going to be a process. It's going to take you a long time to get through, but you have to start somewhere. You also have data sitting out here that are records. So what is a record? Once again, what's privileged? What's proprietary? Do you need to store that somewhere else? When we jump into the rot, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, we're getting a lot of requests at Gimmal to be able to analyze rot data, especially in file shares. So what is rot data? Well, that's quite honestly up to you to decide what is rot and what is not. So what we have been seeing is a lot of times criteria being used such as the creation, modification, or last access date on a file. Maybe it's by the extension. Maybe there's structure within your environment. You can use folders or folder names to be able to understand exactly what data is where, if it's very structured in the proper place. But let's give it some thought too. So that's not the end all criteria that you can use. So for instance, let's say there's a file that created 20 years ago. Is it rot? Well, if it's being accessed weekly, I would say the answer to that is no. Conversely, if you have a file that is only 6 months old, but it has never been accessed since it was created, is that rot? Once again, your decision to make. But keep in mind, you have all those properties of the files to be able to access and use in interrogating the file and the file content itself, which we'll talk about in a bit, to see if that is truly rot and needs to be removed. So determining and enforcing retention policies. I'm going to say this is most applicable, quite honestly, for email. I've been around for some time here helping people enforce email policies. And most of that is because legal has said we will be enforcing policies based upon, once again, the rules and regulations with which they have to comply. So we're seeing a lot of people still doing this today after 20 years, going through and saying anything older than 90 days in the inbox, 180 days in the sent items, 365 in any personal folders that were created, and then saying, okay, this is good for one group, but not for another. So you can have these automated retention policies that I highly recommend to be placed on your different data sources based upon any of that criteria. So for email, the age, what folder it's in, the message type, the message class, category, sender, recipients, domains, all of that data can be used to make up these automated policies to help you define your methodologies. Then we get down to discovering like criteria for all of your different data. So going through and looking at, this is more legal and HR related typically, or if you're being sued for keywords and phrases within your data. Taking into account, you can use some very complex search expressions that have ands and ors and nots, proximities, parentheses, any of those that help qualify your search expressions. And then regex. We're going to be talking about regex in a little bit on the next one as well. But to open this up, for those of you who don't know what regex, it's regular expressions. So those are synonymous. So regex allows you to find patterns. That's what it's mostly used for. And those patterns are things that most likely are PCI and PII, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. But keep in mind with regex, you can actually get very specific with that, not only the pattern, but the leading and trailing values as well. So for instance, if we're looking for a social security number, don't just look for a pattern match of the 3, 2, 4 components, but also go through and looking at the character immediately preceding or following the pattern to make sure that this is not part of a larger pattern, for instance. Using proximities to help you reduce those false positives that most likely you are going to find by performing the regex. So no matter how much refined you get in these regular expressions, there's always going to be a couple of things that sneak through that are false positives. But keeping those down and making sure that you find all the true positives, that's the real key. For Microsoft, if you're searching Office 365, for instance, they're leveraging an index that they have for the keywords and phrases. It really expedites the search process. However, keep in mind, it does not capture patterns. So for keywords and phrases, it's a great tool. If you're looking at searching your file shares, highly recommend having a tool that can produce indexes on that data, once again, to help expedite that processing. That will come in greatly handy when you're going through petabytes or 500 terabytes of data, having that data pre-indexed to help you with the processing. And the last two, PCI, PII, and PHI. So personal credit information, identifiable, and health. So these are key. I've been seeing a lot of requests for this from companies that they're looking to identify this information. Why? Both because it is privileged information that shouldn't be for the public's eye, but second, because of those DSARs and the GDPRs and all the privacy laws, because this data will help identify people directly, and most likely they're not going to want that information being available like that. So one of those violations that I told you about, what if somebody's laptop was stolen? If you have data on your desktop and somebody comes and breaks into your house and steals a desktop or laptop or into the office or hacks, and they get that PCI, I have actually been personally hacked from PII. So it is not a fun road to go down. So I can speak to that very specifically, that it is important to get this information isolated and protected. But here's a little fun fact. For PII, there's actually two categories of that. There's indirect and there's direct. And what that is, indirect is a grouping that is a subset of people. Things like that would be, what you might not consider, but would be things like blood type, ethnicity, gender, language, religion. Those are all indirect PII because they are identifying a subset of people. When you think of direct PII, the one that usually comes to mind is a social security number. That is not the only form of PII. In fact, there's many more that you might not have even considered. So I made a little list up here just to share with you other ways of having PII direct. Your driver's license, that is unique to you. Your email address, your IP address, your license plate, mailing address, Medicare ID, military ID, your passport number, your phone number, your postal code down to the 6th through the 9th digits. And even as far as your VIN, your vehicle identification number, all of those can directly correlate to you, which is PII. When you get into PCI, we're typically talking about credit cards. So once again, that is information that you don't want hacked, because otherwise you'll be dealing with the financial implications of having that information taken from you. And then lastly, PHI. This goes into not only patient numbers and any of the medical charts and anything that can identify you, but it also, believe it or not, goes into another PHI that is also indirect. And that is, there is a lexicon called ICD-10, which contains a list of diseases and drugs And if I remember correctly, there's roughly 72,000 diseases and a few thousand, maybe 7,000 to 8,000 drugs that can group people together again and identify them. So this classify item here, this last box, what that is all about is having the ability to go through and identify your data sources, the data within there, your messages, your files, your items, whatever they might be, and having them classified based upon, are they PII, are they PCI, PHI? So now if you had them pre-classified, when it comes time to actually have to perform any kind of discovery, you have already done a lot of the legwork, and this is going to dramatically reduce, exponentially reduce actually, the amount of time it's going to take to find that data. So with that said, I'm going to show you some of the things that we have from our Gimmal Discover product. And this one, what it did is, this is for file shares, as you see. It went out and found a social security number and showed me a report. I'm going to draw your attention to the identify column. Notice it has US. We are not the only country in the world with a social security number. So we have a lexicon of all those. So it would actually show me social security numbers for other countries if I was so looking for those. And then you're going to notice what we do in our reports is we mask that data. The last thing we want to do is take that PII and propagate it to our database in the cloud. Instead, we're going to mask that information, but provide you with the folder and the file name so that you can go locate it and be able to identify and decide what to do with that data. There's other PII besides social security number that is synonymous with it. Some countries have a national ID number. They have a social insurance number, which is Canada. They have a national insurance number, which is the UK. And they have a tax identification number, which is used very much around the world to help identify individual people as well. Next slide is just going to show me the same thing, but for credit cards. Notice we can even break down the different types of credit cards and identify those by their patterns. And then once again, we're masking that. Draw your attention that some of these have hyphens. Some of these have spaces within them. So using that delimiter, keep that in mind when you're looking for data, that you have to know that specific delimiter. I never recommend using a 16 straight digits to find something, because that might pass for a credit card, but it could also be many other things as well. So try to use delimiters when you can, looking for any patterns. I have two more real quick. First one is for the ROT report, that redundant, obsolete, and trivial. One of the things we did with this is we produced a report that showed us by extension the number of files in a particular folder. Could come in handy, maybe one of your criteria that you use. And then lastly, here's one for DSAR. So in this particular case, we had to go out and find every occurrence of Tom Jones. One of them was actually in the file name, as you see in the third row, but the others are in the snippet column, and just give me an idea of what data we found for them. Keep in mind, that could include not just name, but mailing address. Any of the PII identifiable information can be included within those DSAR requests. So with that said, in conclusion, find your discovery tools that you need, be able to locate that information and understand how that data is stored in your environment. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead on to the next slide. Thanks, Jeff. That was really informative. Our goal for these webinars are kind of give you a little snippet of education. Jeff went through a little bit about what we offer around discovery tools with those last couple of screenshots. Just a little taste of what we offer, but if you'd like more information on any of the information that he provided here in the webinar around Gimmal Discover, or if you'd like to see a demonstration of it, you should see a pop-up on your screen with a poll question. If you'd like more information, if you'd like somebody to reach out, just go ahead and hit yes or no, not at this time. With that, I want to remind everybody that Q&A will go ahead and get started. So if you had any questions that arose, please feel free to submit them. We have a couple of minutes here, so we'll go through the couple of questions that we have. So Jeff, the first question we have is, can Discover be silently installed on desktops?
Oh, good question. So yes, it can. So if you have desktops, that you want to manage, and typically it's going to be because of files, it could also be PSTs, we can, with using your silent deployment software, record a script and then have that script be used to deploy to a subset or the full set of desktops in your environment.
Great. And does Gimmal provide services to create the policies that perform the work?
We do. So if you need some help creating what we call the workflows that were within our data governance module of Gimmal Discover, we can help create those, because that regex is a little daunting, quite honestly. If you're not familiar with regex, it is another language into itself. And I'll be honest, I'm scraping the surface myself on it, but it is very complex. So yes, if you need some help with doing any of that work, we are here for that.
The next one is, how many different data sources can you analyze?
Oh, in Gimmal Discover? Oh, you're going to test me now. Okay, so there's all the flavors of the Exchange mail. So Office 365, 2019, 2016, 2013 on-prem, and 2010, excuse me, on-prem, PSTs, Box, OneDrive, Gmail, G Drive, Teams is coming, and there's one I left out. Oh, OLEDB, which is SQL databases. Now, keep in mind, with SQL databases, we actually can't remediate the data because they have a schema, so we can't break the parent-child relationship of relational databases, but we can perform discovery on that data.
Great. And what are the recommended steps in removing rot?
Oh, be careful. That's the first recommended step. So once again, measure 20 times, cut once. So going through, do the analysis, look at your reports. Before you pull the trigger, make sure that you are comfortable exactly what you're doing. Now, one of the things that Gimmal Discover actually offers is the ability to have a report, and then you can tag each row in the report of the items that you want to take action on, such as delete, and then run another policy against the report itself, and it will delete the tagged items only.
And I realize now, after asking that, I probably should have spelled out that acronym. So that was redundant, obsolete, and trivial. That was ROT. That was said at one point in the slides, but for those that aren't familiar with that acronym, that is what that stands for. And then the last one we have, unless one sneaks through before we end, does the tool work on the data in place where it resides?
Yes. So Gimmal Discover does not move your data somewhere else. We don't send you an appliance. We are working on the data at rest in your environment. If it's in SharePoint on-prem, then we're going to connect to SharePoint on-prem with our agent and perform the work. If it's a file share, same thing. We do not move your data, nor does it get, not only does it not move to process it, we never put it to the cloud either. It stays exactly where it is, and we process it in place.
Great. Well, that wraps up our Q&A. If you guys can think of any more questions, both of our email addresses are right there up on the screen. Jeff's last name is a little hard to spell. So Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide, you can always email us at info@gimmal.com if it's a little easier to remember, or visit our website, www.gimmal.com, which has more information on Gimmal Discover if you'd like to read up on it. If you are interested in a recording of this webinar, we send it out in the form of a thank you email between 24 to 48 hours. It is also available on our website between that time frame as well. And we hope to see you next week on our webinar on driving value with information architecture. We thank you for joining. Thank you, Jeff, for speaking today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.